at it, man. It's the latest broadcast. I'm Pastor Doug. I'm in Boulder, and in the studio next to me is Henry Loke. Henry, you get to do the introduction, man.
All right, we are continuing in Ruth. We're Ruth 2:14. We'll see how far we get. Title is All That She Wanted and More.
Okay, so let me start with, I'm just going to read 13. And we're actually starting with 14, and I'll read a little bit. So we're talking about Ruth, and she said, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord." She was talking to Boaz, who has really reached out to her. "You've given me comfort. You've spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." So for those of you who have been listening to the earlier broadcast, you know what the context is there. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, that's to Ruth, "Come over here. Have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all that she wanted, and she had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men: "Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed for barley. She gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. Okay?
Ephah.
Probably ephah. I'll probably be ready.
Right.
It's an interesting word and what that might mean. There's a lot of conversation about that. So, Henry, where do you want to start with this?
Well, we have this Boaz guy now we find is a member of Naomi's extended family, right?
Yep.
And providing provision and protection for Ruth and Naomi and an extension. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, he's definitely a man of God, living out God's grace and mercy as laid out in the law of Moses, right?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, okay. Well, so what I'm thinking is he, up till this verse 14, he's been pretty kind and pretty gracious, compassionate. And I think where we're going now is his compassion has not been exhausted because he's going to invite her now into dinner.
Right.
So it's more than just you can be in the fields and all that. And what I found was interesting in a little bit of research was in the ancient Near East, when people gathered together for a meal, it wasn't just to satisfy their hunger. It wasn't just to make their stomachs quit growling. It was actually symbolic, kind of a significance that the whoever was the host that would invite someone in was being hospitable. Now, I got that from some historical background on a commentary from Daniel Block on Ruth. And, I think that's significant because you look at the early church and the way they came together and they broke bread together. Yeah. We've talked about New Day and food and all this. Sometimes it gets kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of Old Testament scriptures. One is Genesis 18, where the meal was almost like a covenant, where the social realities at mealtime would come together, and it was a form of fellowship. So he has taken a big step to let her in to have the meal with him. That's kind of what I was getting.
Yeah, there's it kind of goes, this invitation kind of crosses all economic and social and racial lines, man. There's no, because Moabites were not considered necessarily good people in these days. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's more of a...
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it's
so...
like a Samaritan or something. That's on the other side of the fence.
And so Boaz, his it seems to me, and I was listening to Alistair Begg talk about this morning, he's a guy that's really focused on making sure that his household is following God's law, that this generosity, and it's not just out of duty that he does it. It doesn't seem like. It seems like this generosity comes from his heart. I think so. I think this is something that comes out of the generosity of his heart, and it's a huge example of God's grace.
Yes. Well, so here's another part I thought when you were talking about crossing all the boundaries. Now, this is a pretty well-to-do, affluent landowner, and he eats meals with his harvesters.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Come join us with the meal. So he's not in the high tower, or I'm in the mansion and you're out in the shed. He's like, no, come and join us. So they must have been pretty shocked about it all. And then, like you brought up, that she's a Moabite. Now, for me, the part come near is significant, or come over here is where he begins. I believe the social custom is going to be that she's supposed to keep her distance. she's not supposed to even assume because she's an alien or a stranger or whatever, but instead he's encouraging her to come and share. And it's share that's, I think it's from the bounty that he's already set aside for his own servants' team.
Yeah, because I'm sure there was some pecking order on how they sat. And because granted, this was Egyptian versus Hebrew with Joseph and his brothers. Like when Joseph is in charge and his brothers come down to get food and they sit and have a meal with him, Joseph is sitting here and his brothers are sitting there, and he has to he invites, I think, the youngest one, Benjamin, to come up and sit with him and that. So in those days, there was kind of a pecking order on how they sat and where they sat and who sat, and all that. And Boaz here is the owner. He's eating basically with the hired help.
Yeah.
He's
exactly.
sharing a meal with the hired help.
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
And then this part where he tells Ruth to dip your bread or your morsel, I think is probably a morsel of bread, maybe is the Hebrew on it. It's interesting that my Bible calls it in the wine vinegar. So I decided to do a little study on this word. I'm going to pronounce it homes, is the Hebrew in this. It indicates likely some kind of alcoholic beverage or some kind of intoxicant is what I found with my study. Okay. So it might be that they've got some kind of a dip that's got some like brandy in it or something. There's something, or maybe some kind of potent wine.
Right.
But what I think he's really saying is, don't just eat the crumbs. Don't just eat dry bread. Come in here and enjoy the pleasantries of real food.
Right.
Real food here.
Well,
that is amazing.
Well, he's a prime example of God's grace, as I said before. And Begg makes this point. He asks this question. He says, "How does the 21st century meet the invisible God of the universe?" And he answers it, and he says, by the hands and the hearts of those who declare themselves to be part of God's covenant family.
Absolutely.
And this is what Boaz is showing.
Man.
This is Boaz down to the letter. I mean, this is a guy who, if he were around now, those who would come, as Begg says, looking for God, it's like, I'll try to go to church. I'll go to see what this Christianity thing is about. He would be our prime spokesman. They would find in Boaz the heart and the hands of God.
That's awesome.
And we need to be more like that, right? Because seriously, I think it's a great question. How does the 21st century find God?
Yeah.
It's got to be in us and through us. And they've got to see him. If they don't, if the actions don't meet the words,
what's the point?
Yeah, well, the point will be then to continue to drive people away, which is kind of what happens in certain circumstances.
Now, here's what I saw when I was looking at this. I'm thinking Boaz, in one sense, reflects in the Old Testament some of the teachings that Jesus reflects in the New Testament. So instead of an adulterous woman he invites in for dinner, like we find in some of the Gospels, he invites this alien who's a Moabite, which would have been second class at best. Okay, maybe even from a tribe that's a clan or enemy of the Israelite type people. Then, when it says he gives her food enough to satisfy her needs, but the Bible says that she also had some left over. So I believe what I get out of it is Boaz's generosity is in abundance. So where I was going in my mind was when Jesus fed the multitudes and there was all this stuff left over. Okay, and it's some kind of a witness that is so powerful that, and there's a root in there in the Hebrew called hesed, which is a word primarily translated blessed or being a blessing, and he's showing it with his life that he's generous, he's compassionate, he's accepting, he's, you and I have talked about how easy it is to put up walls. When people, we have.
Right, yeah,
this guy doesn't have walls.
No.
But he also isn't just pouring out in ways that are stupid. He's very intentional.
Right. Yeah, it's not careless.
He's not careless. That's the best way to say it.
Well,
yes.
Begg calls it the first biblical evidence of a doggy bag.
Wow.
He sends her home with this food. He tells his people who are harvesting as they go back out, make sure you leave enough food for her. I mean, she goes home with what my commentary says is about 30 pounds of food.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Well,
just,
and I really thought when when we first started the series of Ruth, maybe 3 broadcasts back or so, I said, well, he's really taken notice of her at the very beginning. But I was doing some more study on this, and there really isn't, at least so far in the story, any hint whatsoever that Boaz is looking at her in any other way than he's just a good guy who knows that God has sent him to this situation. He's trying to repair her. I mean, he's trying to repay her for the kindness of how she stood up for her mother. And this guy is, I don't think he's going after her like because she's some young chick that he's,
No.
He sees her differently, and she sees him differently. Now, as the story continues, we're going to find out that God intervenes and he becomes what's called the kinsman redeemer.
Yep.
Okay, because of their ancestry.
Right.
So what I'm getting out of this deal is that what would normally be separate is now becoming connected. And the fact that Ruth has a deceased husband, there is some Old Testament law comes out of Deuteronomy. It's called it's a type of marriage ritual, and there's something here that's being kind of a foreshadow.
Right.
Something's coming.
Well, isn't this interesting how God's law ends up being for the betterment of the people that follow him? Right, this whole kinsman redeemer thing, there's a purpose behind it.
Yep.
And you're going to see that, I think, if I remember the story right, Boaz says, I can do this, but there's somebody in line first.
Yeah.
And that guy refuses, and Boaz steps in. But it goes down the line, and it ends up being for the betterment of his people that God does these things. And so, we're in Leviticus in the daily scripture. We're part of the reading that's happening now or is going to happen here soon is this whole thing about leprosy. And there's this step by step stuff of if it's somebody with leprosy, here's how you check it. If the leprosy's in the house, here's what you have to do. And it's, and rather than being this tedious thing because, God just had nothing to do that day and we're just going to make up all these rules. It's like, no, there's the health of the entire populace that needs to be considered here. Yeah. So these are the steps to take to make sure everybody's taken care of. Make sure that you just deal with this in the right way.
Just think if we all were to do that today. Well, I mean, if we but let's talk about something else. Oh man, I can't believe I'm saying this. We've also talked about, like let's say for example, you open up your house to people, and we've done that at our house.
Yep.
And sometimes it's a challenge, and sometimes there's great fruit from it. You've opened up your house at times, great challenges. Sometimes there's fruit, and sometimes you go, man, what am I doing here? Right.
Right.
But I think the only reason that because I'm not asking for everybody to just open up their houses to anybody so that there's nobody sleeping on the street. That's not what I'm talking about. And you said it well earlier. It wasn't like it was careless or I'm going to say
he's
haphazard.
Called to this.
He is clearly called to it.
Yep.
So he is so walking in a sense. I'm going to say walking in the Spirit. In this case, he is so walking in obedience to what God has called him to do, and he's got all the characteristics in his spirit. And when he says to his people, and don't embarrass her while she's out gathering the sheaves, then he says, don't embarrass her, rather pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and then don't rebuke her. What I think he's doing is he's making it so that her work isn't so hard. If you're bent over in the field, the harvesters ahead of her or whoever are already pulling it out. So they're making her job easy so that it's way more production in what she receives. That's pretty special. That is extremely thoughtful, And then when he says don't embarrass her, I think what he's saying is don't insult her, don't laugh at her, don't humiliate her, don't shame her by doing all this. Be a blessing to her. That's what I really get.
Well, there's this saying, Linda always has it, and it was a guy who she used to work for. He always used to say a fish rots from the head down, right? And so and you see it like in soccer, as the adults behave, so go the kids. Well, in this case, as the master of the house behaves, so do the servants. And so you have this woman coming in from Moab with her mother-in-law now, and Boaz is saying, look, we are going to be for lack of a better term, we're going to show Christian charity here. We're going to show, we're going to be God's hands and feet and his voice and his heart, and we're going to do what's right here. Yeah. And so, you guys are going to do what you do, and her place is to glean after the harvesters go through. Well, I'm telling you, this woman and her mother-in-law need to eat. So make sure you leave enough in the field for her to eat and then some. And he just does what's right. He just does what's right according to God's law and in God's eyes. And we'll be blessed for it eventually. But this is what we are called to do. I love Beg's analogy of what do people find when they come to the church now and they're seeking God? What do they find in the people that claim to follow His Son? And I think we have to. You have to really look at that and answer it accurately. What do they find? And you have to, it starts with each of us individually. Mm-hmm. What do we do to the stranger who comes in? There was a great song, If We Are the Body, and I can't remember who does it.
Oh, yeah, it's a great song.
It talks about how, if a guy comes, don't sing.
I won't ruin it.
If a guy,
folks. No.
If a guy comes in and slides into that back pew, does he feel welcome, or does he feel just looked at and judged and that kind of thing, and he talks about, I think, girls, high school kids, just how biting and mean they can be, and what does that do to somebody?
Look at the witness this Boaz is setting. He's setting the DNA for his harvesters, for his community.
And for us.
And I was thinking about my dear friend Dave Irish, who's you know Dave now quite well, and great worship leader, very anointed and called, and he's always said to me because he serves a lot as an interim worship leader, he goes into various churches where he's called in, and he said you can tell all kinds of stuff about the DNA of the church by the spiritual DNA of the leader. It follows down through the leadership. And so I was thinking of the responsibility that you and I have when you're leading worship and I'm leading, and you and I have had great conversations. And just yesterday, you were talking about there's certain things that are just not good enough, that you just know they got to be better. And I think that's where you're coming from.
Yep.
I do hear that.
Yeah, the offering has to be the first fruits. It can't be what's left over. Can't be
and look what he's doing. Now, here's another interesting part is that when he says, don't humiliate her or don't rebuke her or don't embarrass her, however you want to read that, okay? He's even saying at one point, don't touch her, okay? Now, what I'm thinking about is imagine for a minute, let's just go with Boulder for a second. When a woman is homeless in Boulder versus a man is homeless in Boulder living on the streets, it's a different level of protocol, a different level of protection. For example, I do know here that several of the nonprofits that help provide housing and stuff, if a woman with children shows up on the street, they move way up to the top of the list to get them protected and into a house. If an old man shows up, they're like, dude, figure it out. Okay. But that's part of where we're at in society. Okay.
Right.
So what happens on the street is men like to hook up with the woman as fast as possible so they can slide in and enjoy the house that comes from the, I've watched it in the feeding ministry and the things that happen. So a woman is quite vulnerable because she can be taken advantage of. You see where this is going?
Yeah.
And so I think what he's telling them is, let's make sure that although you might see her as an uninvited guest, you need to be upstanding people here, okay? She may not have been a hired servant like you guys are, but this is our field. She was sent here. So don't abuse her, don't touch her, don't shame her, don't laugh at her, don't threaten her, and do not treat her like an alien, okay? Or is she some kind of low class? Instead, you need to be compassionate and welcoming. That is beautiful.
Well, I think part of it too. He's taken some of that kinsman redeemer role on, and he's also saying if any of you guys are thinking inappropriately, just man and woman kind of thing, don't even think about it.
Don't go there.
Don't even think about it. You're going to deal with me.
You got to love this Boaz guy.
Yeah, he's awesome.
He's awesome.
Well, he sets the example. I mean, it's a great example of what we all should be, and it's a prime example of that. Widows and orphans type of thing that the church is charged with taking care of. This is a guy who's living it out and living it out gladly. Yeah. By the way, he's not going, what is she doing here? What do I have to deal with her? He's like, he's welcoming. He's doing it out of the joy of his heart, and he's happy to do it.
Right.
And that's how we need to not be dragging ourselves, giving out of, reluctantly or whatever. It needs to be joyful, or don't do it, because God knows what the state of the heart is in the midst of it, and you're not going to be fooling anybody.
Well, I got a quick closing thought from me, okay? I was talking actually with a guy who's a Jewish man recently, and we were having a pretty engaged, fun conversation, and he asked me questions about the faith and the church and how he operated, and he told me about how a synagogue works. And he paused for a minute, and he said, "You really understand that the people who come to your church aren't yours to manipulate and control." And I said, "Well, I'm glad you hear that in my voice, and I work hard at that, but what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, can you tell me how you understand that? Because you're coming across much different than the way most rabbis I know how they deal with the people that come to their synagogue." So here's what I said. God made it really clear to me that the sheep are my sheep. They're not your sheep, Doug. So when he first called me to be a pastor, he said, if you ever think the sheep are yours or they belong to New Day, you've missed the point that the sheep are mine and they belong to my kingdom, not to your church. And so I told this to the Jewish man, and I told him that's why we don't offer a formal membership structure from a worldly point of view, because I just want to make sure people are in the household of God and not be confused that just because I'm a member of the local church that somehow I'm in for salvation. And that doesn't mean the churches that have membership means they're wrong. I just know God called me to make sure that I understand that it's about God's kingdom and it's God's sheep. So then I told this man, I said, God made it really clear to me. When I send sheep to the place where I have called you to serve as a pastor, I send the sheep to you, not for you. Okay? I sent the sheep to you, but they're not for you. They're for me. They're my sheep. This man was almost weeping on me and said that was so beautiful for him to hear. And I told him the only reason why it's beautiful is because it's coming from God. It's not coming from me. And I believe that Boaz is showing an example that the vineyard, all of the harvest isn't, Boaz knows this is not my harvest. This is not my land. These are not my workers. This is God's vineyard. This is God's blessing. These are God's people. And we just need to live it out. And I think that is beyond beautiful.